Good afternoon here on KATE. We have a very special guest in studio, Mr. Jim Hagedorn. He's the endorsed Republican candidate running for the 1st Congressional District. And Mr. Hagedorn, good afternoon to you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, Paul.
Now, let's talk a little bit about who you are. People might not be familiar with you, the person. Maybe they're familiar with you, the candidate, as you did run in 2014. So for those listening who aren't familiar, maybe a little bit of your background, if you would.
Sure. I'm a product of southern Minnesota. I was born in Blue Earth. I was raised on a grain and livestock farm just a few miles outside of Truman, a small town over there in Martin County. My father, Tom Hagedorn, was a congressman here many years ago in the 70s and 80s. And I worked for a congressman out in Washington named Stanglin. We did good things like work for welfare, Second Amendment rights. We supported farming and pro-life positions. And then I had a gig or two in Washington as an executive in the Treasury Department, where I downsized my own federal agency, probably the only person ever to run for Congress that actually made the Washington, D.C. smaller and more accountable to the taxpayer. So we've been running here for, I was on the ballot in 2014. We had a 46% result against the incumbent, Tim Walz. We didn't spend much money in that race, so we're back in this time, working harder, working longer, trying to get in front of the people again. It's a big district, 21 counties, the 1st district. So sometimes in a big district like this, you have to build it up, and we're taking our message to every corner, and it's just a pleasure to be with you today.
Now let's talk a little bit about that background. Southern Minnesota guy, small town mentality. Is that the type of view, if elected, you'd bring to Washington?
Absolutely. I'm growing up in a small rural community, growing up on a farm. There's something about that. It instills in you some deep appreciation for agriculture, a deep appreciation for how family farming sustains our rural areas and creates economic opportunities. One of the things that's really concerning me now is that we see the ag economy tightening. Commodity prices are continuously low. The input costs are high. We have a glut of product, and then the median income for farmers, unfortunately, at a 20-year low. And we all understand the ups and downs of farming. I mean, my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all southern Minnesota farmers, so I get it. But what we don't understand is when our congressman out in Washington, Tim Walz, is voting for liberal policies that are driving up farmers and agricultural costs. These EPA regulations coming out of Washington that he supported are just egregious, driving up costs. Obamacare, there are people in this district now, farmers and others, spending $10,000 to $25,000 a year on premiums with deductibles so high that the underlying insurance is worthless. That's crushing them. And then these high energy costs. We need U.S. energy independence, not these global warming extremist policies that Walz has supported with Obama that's driving up everyone's costs. So I think those are the types of things I do for the farmers and for agribusiness, which in turn would support our small rural communities.
Now, I know recently you've got WASD that was passed through Congress. Is that something that you'd look at trying to fix when it comes to how the EPA and all of those people come together? And it seems any drop of water, a puddle on a farm, could be looked at one of those bodies of water.
Yeah, you're talking about the Waters of the United States regulation coming out of Obama's EPA. And it honestly, it would be like weaponizing the federal government against our farmers. We cannot allow that to happen. The current congressman, Tim Walz, voted for that regulation twice before he finally voted against it. But I think we need somebody that's going to be for the farmers 100%. One of the ways that we can fix these things is Congress should take back its regulatory authority. We shouldn't allow EPA and other agencies to put these regulations out, they're effectively laws, without Congress having to approve them. And so there's a bill out there called the REINS Act. The Republicans have brought this up continuously. And it says that Congress must be required to vote yes on all these major regulations like Waters of the United States. I support that wholeheartedly. That's a way to defeat the EPA. Congressman Walz has voted against that bill repeatedly.
Now, you talked a little bit about energy independence. How would you go about bringing that energy independence, especially here in southern Minnesota?
Well, when you talk energy independence, we have to understand one thing. The only energy source that the United States is dependent upon foreign sources for is crude oil. We are 100% self-sufficient in every energy source except crude oil. So I support an all-of-the-above approach to get us to achieve U.S. energy independence. And then I also support very strongly the infrastructure needed in order to efficiently use our energy resources, pipelines, distribution points, refineries. We need to be building those so we can efficiently use those sources and keep downward pressure on cost. The United States became a great economic power in large measure because we had reliable, abundant, low-cost U.S. energy, and that is a policy we have to get back to. These global warming policies that artificially stop us from using coal, oil, gas, and other sources are a disgrace. The congressman has repeatedly voted for these things, these EPA regulations of Obama's, driving up people's electricity costs, driving up your fuel costs, making us less competitive around the world. Frankly, he's so extreme on the issue that I always say he worships at the altar of Mother Earth, and his high priest is Al Gore. We need somebody in Washington that's going to support our U.S. economy and try to keep some money in consumers' pockets rather than having them spend it for higher energy costs.
Talking with Republican candidate Jim Hagedorn. He's running for the 1st Congressional District here today on Kate. We talked a little bit about those rural values that you have. One of those has to be fiscal responsibility. Is that something that you are firm, wholeheartedly believing in?
Well, I'll tell you what, what's going on in Washington, our economy, unfortunately, is anemic. And where we're in trouble and we can lose our American way of life is with the $19 trillion national debt. The debt, when the congressman said when he went to Washington 10 years ago, he promised to do something about the national debt. I thought that meant make it smaller. But since he's been there, it's gone from $8.5 trillion up to past $19 trillion. And we're financing that at 1% interest. When interest rates ratchet up, the interest on the debt is going to consume our economy. So the problem, there are a couple of problems here. One is the national debt of $19 trillion is larger than our entire economy, and it's growing faster than our entire economy. So what we need to do to deal with that, obviously we need to reform government, be fiscally conscientious, but we also have to grow our economy. If we don't have massive economic growth, we are going to be suffocated by this debt. And I think the best way to have massive economic growth and to help people create high-wage jobs and have better lives is to weed out excessive government in our economy. We talked about regulatory reform. We need tax reform. So people are in charge of how to spend their money, not the politicians and the interest groups. We need welfare reform. So folks are out there working for their welfare if they're able-bodied and being self-sufficient and not dependent on government. And then getting rid of programs like Obamacare and replacing them with free market reforms. That's critical, and U.S. energy independence.
We hear in the news all the time now, you hear about ISIS, you hear about ISIL, terrorism, things of that nature. We're in the heartland. Is that something that we should be concerned with, in your opinion?
Well, we have to be concerned with it because it's a global problem, and you see the destabilization in the Middle East. The Obama administration inherited a relatively stable Middle East with a lot of actors that were pro-American. They went and undermined that. They withdrew troops out of Iraq. That has created a vacuum. ISIS has filled it. They toppled the government in Egypt. That was a problem. Libya, look at that war that Clinton had against Gaddafi that Walls supported. My goodness, that has completely destabilized everything and given us this refugee crisis. So in the United States, we have to make sure that we protect the people from radical Islam. We should not be allowing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to come to the United States from countries that hate us. At this point, I think I've called for a refugee program timeout because we don't know what's going on. We need to figure that out. And the reason it's a concern, obviously people are dying and it's a problem in that respect. But when events like 9/11 happen, it takes an enormous toll on the United States economy. It hurts people physically. It hurts us psychologically. And we just can't allow that to happen. Radical Islam is a true enemy, and we must eradicate it.
I'm talking with Jim Hagedorn today. Now, the apparent Republican nominee for president is Donald Trump. I think a lot of people either are really for it or they're still kind of shrugging their shoulders if they follow the Republican Party at all. What's your view of having Donald Trump as the presidential candidate for the Republican Party?
Well, I've said all along, whoever Republicans nominate in our Cleveland convention, I will support that candidate. It looks like it's going to be Donald Trump, and I'll be pleased to run with him in the fall. What's going on right now between the two political parties is you have a big, clear contrast. You have Hillary Clinton over here with Tim Walz, and what do they offer? They offer Obama's third term. They offer a Supreme Court that is going to take away our Second Amendment rights, take away our religious liberties. And, on the other side, we have Republicans that want to have serious reform of Washington, solutions that are going to take power from Washington, give it back to the states and the American people. And we want to protect our God-given rights, the right to life, the right to keep and bear arms, and the right to religious freedom. So it's going to be a clear contrast, offer stark choices for the people, and I'm excited about the race in November.
We're excited for you. You can find out more information, jimhagedorn.org. Candidate Hagedorn, I want to thank you for stopping by and sharing some time with us today.
Thank you, Paul. It was a pleasure.